I still remember that night, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. It wasn't peace. It was the sound of something dying quietly. Our house, once full of warmth and laughter, had become a museum of echoes. The old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from my late mother, ticked with an almost cruel rhythm. Each second felt like a reminder of everything I had built, and everything I was about to lose. Julian had just come home from yet another one of his business dinners. He looked exhausted, not the kind of tired you feel after a long day, but the kind that comes from carrying a secret too heavy to hide. His face was pale, drawn, and lined in places I hadn't noticed before. He tossed his jacket on the couch, loosened his tie as if it were strangling him, and walked past me without a word. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the air, familiar, comforting, but underneath it, there was something else. A sweet, floral fragrance that didn't belong to me, and didn't belong in our home. He collapsed onto the bed, the springs groaning under his weight. Within minutes, I could hear his soft snoring, once a sound that comforted me. Tonight, it mocked me. It sounded like a lullaby for a fool. I sat there in the kitchen, the room dimly lit by the small lamp on the counter. The air felt heavy, like a storm that hadn't yet broken. My eyes wandered to the wedding clock again. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of shared dreams, laughter, and little rituals. And yet, tonight, it all felt like a beautifully crafted lie. I began to tidy up the living room, something I always did when I couldn't sleep. Julian's jacket, his wallet, his old phone lying on the table. The glow of the screen caught my eye, an open email app. That was strange. Julian never used email. He always said, "Juliet, that tech stuff is too complicated. I'd rather just make a call." Curiosity, no. Something deeper than curiosity, a wife's instinct, made my fingers reach for the phone. One new message. I opened it. The words were simple. Only a few lines. But they tore through my chest like a blade. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." Red heart. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The word, Dad, echoed in my head, over and over, like a cruel joke. Who would write something like that? And with a heart emoji? My throat tightened. My hands started to shake. I scrolled, searching for more. Nothing. Just an anonymous email address, random letters and numbers. No clue who it belonged to. But the message, the tone, it was intimate. And the hour it was sent, 10:47 p.m., while he was supposedly at that business dinner. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, careful not to make a sound. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might wake him. Through the half-open bedroom door, I could see Julian lying there, peaceful, motionless, as if nothing in the world was wrong. How could he look so calm, while my world was beginning to fall apart? I picked up his jacket again, my fingers brushing against the fabric, searching for something, anything. In the pocket, a crisp piece of paper. A receipt. From a steakhouse. San Antonio. I froze. He'd told me he was in Dallas. I looked closer. Dinner for two. A bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the same wine he bought me for our 10th anniversary. And 2 entrees, filet and pasta. A quiet, bitter laugh escaped my lips. I couldn't remember the last time he'd taken me to a place like that. Maybe 10 years ago, when I opened my first bakery. He'd toasted to my success that night, smiling proudly in the flicker of candlelight. That memory used to make me happy. Now, it just made me sick. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the receipt. And of the email. Something inside me, something ancient and primal, whispered that this wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was truth clawing its way to the surface. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake and demand the truth. But instead, I just stood there, breathing through the ache, the betrayal burning in my chest like acid. I walked quietly toward the garage. Julian's old SUV still smelled of gasoline and his cologne, but there it was again, that same floral perfume. Something didn't feel right. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and began to search. The glove compartment, the seats, the floor. loose change, a water bottle, a few napkins. And then, my fingers brushed against something plastic. Slick, cold. I pulled it out. A small tube. Personal lubricant. Half used. My stomach dropped. Julian and I hadn't been intimate in years. He always said he was tired. That age had taken away his desire. So, who was this for? I stared at that tube for what felt like an eternity. The proof of everything I didn't want to believe. I placed it back exactly where I found it, wiped my hands clean, and stood there in the dark garage. A wife of 40 years who suddenly realized she might have been living beside a stranger all along. The silence in that garage was different. It wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of something breaking inside me. And in that moment, I promised myself I would find out the truth. No matter what it cost me. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Sleep had refused to visit me. My thoughts were still tangled in the web Julian had spun, a web I was now determined to tear apart. The email. The receipt. The tube in the glove compartment. Each piece sat in my mind like shards of broken glass. The air in the house was thick, unmoving. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick slower, as if time itself pitied me. Julian came downstairs around 7, bleary-eyed and pretending to yawn. He smiled faintly, that same old rehearsed smile. "Morning, Juliet," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Got a busy day ahead." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. "Dallas again?" I asked quietly. He froze, just a flicker. A pause so brief most people would miss it. But I didn't, not after 40 years. "Yes," he replied too quickly. "Big meeting, late night." "Be careful," I said, handing him his briefcase with a calm that felt foreign even to me. Inside, I was screaming. He left in a hurry, his car engine roaring down the street. And the moment his tail lights disappeared, I grabbed my keys and went straight to the garage. The SUV door creaked open. The air inside was still heavy with that floral perfume. I turned on my flashlight again, searching every inch, every pocket, every shadow. Under the seat, a napkin, crumpled and faintly stained with lipstick. Next to it, another small plastic cap, the kind that might belong to a lotion or a cosmetic bottle. And on the passenger seat, a faint shimmer, perfume residue on the leather, catching the light like a cruel reminder. I picked up the napkin, held it close, and inhaled. Sweet, overpowering. Not my scent. Not my world. It wasn't just a woman's perfume anymore, it was the scent of betrayal. And it clung to everything he touched. I took photos of it all. Every angle, every detail. The tube, the napkin, the leather seat. If Julian wanted to live a lie, I would make sure that lie had a record. As I stood there, my reflection caught in the window, the faint outline of a woman in her 60s. Still wearing her nightgown, holding her phone like a weapon, I realized something. I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. I was angry. And anger, when you've been silent for too long, can be the beginning of clarity. I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at my hands. The same hands that had built a life, a bakery, a family. The same hands that had kneaded dough at dawn, cleaned floors, signed contracts, and raised a son. These hands had worked too hard to be brushed aside like I didn't matter. That morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to confront Julian until I had proof, solid, undeniable proof. And I knew exactly who could help me get it. Mrs. Miller. An old friend. Years ago, she'd once told me about a private investigator she knew, a man named Thomas. Discreet and reliable. At 8 a.m., I dialed her number. "Juliet, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft but cautious. I need the number you once mentioned," I said quietly. "The private investigator." A pause. Then her tone changed, heavier. "Knowing. Julian?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know yet, but I need to." She gave me the number. No more questions, no hesitation, just quiet understanding. The kind only women who have lived through pain can offer each other. By noon, I sat in a small cafe downtown. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air, a smell that usually calmed me. Not today. Today, it felt like I was sitting in the waiting room of my own heartbreak. Thomas arrived right on time. A middle-aged man in a light blue shirt, carrying a small notebook. He didn't introduce himself with a handshake, just a simple nod. Professional, efficient. Mrs. Roberts? I nodded and handed him a flash drive. Photos, emails, a receipt, and something I found in his car. He looked through the pictures carefully. No judgment, no surprise, just quiet observation. I understand, he said. I'll start following Mr. Roberts this afternoon. You'll hear from me soon. That was it. No drama, no false promises. Just calm assurance, the kind that steadies your heartbeat when everything else is falling apart. When I left the cafe, the world felt colder. Couples walked hand in hand. Cars honked. People laughed. Life went on, untouched by the disaster unraveling inside me. I walked home slowly, the flash drive heavy in my purse like a secret too big to carry. Inside the house, the clock was still ticking, stubbornly marking time as if nothing had changed. That night, I sat in my bakery. The smell of flour and sugar, usually my comfort, only reminded me of all the years Julian and I had worked to build this life. All the early mornings, all the sacrifices, all the times I believed we were partners. My phone vibrated. A message from Thomas. Mrs. Roberts, I think I found something you should see. Attached was a single photo. I opened it, and the world tilted beneath me. Julian, in his favorite light blue shirt, walking into a restaurant, holding hands with a woman. I zoomed in. Her face came into focus. And my breath caught. Allison, my daughter-in-law, the wife of my only son. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Just stared at the screen as the image burned into my mind, my husband and my son's wife. Smiling like lovers. It didn't make sense. At family dinners, they could barely look at each other. Now they were sitting in a corner booth, wine glasses in hand, candles between them, eyes locked in a way that made my stomach turn. My hand trembled as I saved the photo. The bakery lights flickered slightly above me, casting long shadows across the room. And in that dim, empty space, I whispered to myself, "You can betray me, Julian, but not my family, not our son." Something inside me shifted that night. The fear that had paralyzed me was gone. What replaced it was colder, sharper. Determination. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Julian and Allison's hands intertwined flashed in the dark. 40 years of marriage, reduced to a single photograph. By sunrise, I had already made 2 pots of coffee and gone through a dozen old invoices at the bakery. Anything to keep my hands busy. Anything to stop the trembling. Julian didn't notice. He never noticed anymore. He walked into the kitchen, kissed my cheek, and said the same line he always did. "Long day ahead, sweetheart." I wanted to scream. But instead, I smiled and nodded. "Don't work too hard," I whispered. When he left, I called Thomas. "I want to know everything," I told him. "Every place he goes, every person he meets, every lie he tells." Thomas's voice was calm. "Yes, ma'am, I'll keep you updated." By late afternoon, my phone buzzed. A new message. A short one. "Mrs. Roberts, he's on the move." Attached was a photo. Julian, again in that same light blue shirt, entering another restaurant, this time, not in San Antonio, but closer to home. And across from him, sitting by the window, Allison. I felt my stomach twist. In broad daylight. They weren't even hiding. He poured her wine, his hand brushing hers in a way that felt too familiar, too practiced. Thomas followed them for several days. And with each report, my heart broke a little more. They met at hotels. They drove around town together. Sometimes, they even went to the same cafe where I'd first met Thomas. The irony was cruel. Every time I heard the chime of my phone, a part of me hoped it would all stop. That maybe I'd open a message saying it was a misunderstanding. But the photos kept coming. Proof piled upon proof. And then, one night, Thomas sent a short text that made my hands go cold. "Mrs. Roberts, you need to see this in person." He sent a video file. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the thumbnail, a dimly lit balcony, curtains fluttering in the wind. I pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Julian stood there, a glass of red wine in hand. Allison stepped out behind him, barefoot, her hair falling loose over her shoulders. She said something, I couldn't hear it, and he laughed. That laugh. I hadn't heard it in years. Not since the early days of our marriage, when we used to dance in the kitchen after closing the bakery. Now, he was laughing like that with her. She leaned closer, whispered in his ear. He turned, cupped her face, and kissed her. I paused the video. My whole body went still. I pressed play again, as if watching it one more time could make it unreal. But the truth was undeniable. The man I'd shared a lifetime with was having an affair with our own daughter-in-law. I sank back into my chair, my hands trembling. The smell of sugar and yeast in the bakery suddenly made me nauseous. Every little sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, felt amplified, cruel. I thought of Daniel, our son. His laughter, his pride, the way he always said, "Mom, you and Dad are my example of what love looks like." What would he say now? What would this do to him? Tears welled up, but they didn't fall. I was past tears. This wasn't sadness anymore. It was betrayal, deep, deliberate, and disgusting. Thomas texted again. "They're at the Grandview Hotel. Room 304. He's registered under her name." I stared at the message, my mind spinning. Room 304. I imagined them together, laughing, drinking wine, sharing the kind of closeness I hadn't felt with Julian in years. And suddenly, the ache inside me hardened into something else. Resolve. I needed more than pictures. I needed the truth in their own words. "Thomas," I wrote back, "can you get audio? I need to know what they're planning." He replied almost instantly. "I'll try, but be careful. Don't let him know anything yet." I locked the bakery that night and walked home slowly. The world outside looked normal, couples walking dogs, lights glowing in windows, but mine had turned upside down. Inside the house, Julian's jacket hung on the back of the chair. His shoes were by the door, perfectly aligned. To anyone else, it looked like a husband coming home to his wife. To me, it looked like a stranger's disguise. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me didn't look broken. She looked ready. And just as I whispered that to myself, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Thomas. "Mrs. Roberts, you were right to ask for audio. I think you'll want to hear this." He attached a file. I put on my headphones, my hands trembling slightly, and pressed play. First came Allison's voice, sweet, but sharp underneath. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want that old woman out of the house. I want it all." Then Julian's voice, calm, confident, the same tone he used when talking business. "Don't worry, Juliet trusts me completely. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her." The blood drained from my face. They weren't just cheating. They were planning to take everything I had built, my bakery, my home, my life's work. All those years of waking before dawn, kneading dough until my fingers cracked, making deliveries in the rain. And now, they were plotting to steal it all. The recording ended, but the echo of their voices lingered in my mind. I sat there in the dark, gripping my phone, shaking with rage. Not the kind that burns quickly and fades. The kind that stays, cold and precise. In that moment, I stopped being a victim and started becoming something else entirely. I saved the audio file to a flash drive, labeling it, proof. One by one, I gathered every photo, every receipt, every timestamp, every piece of their lies, and stored it like ammunition. Julian thought he was playing a game. But he had no idea who he was playing against. Because I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was an avenger. For the next 2 days, I barely spoke. Julian came and went like he always did, humming to himself, sipping his morning coffee as if nothing in the world had changed. But for me, everything had. Every movement he made, every word he spoke, every glance he gave, I studied it all like evidence in a courtroom. I wasn't Juliet the wife anymore. I was Juliet the witness. And the man sleeping beside me wasn't a husband. He was a suspect. Thomas kept sending updates. Each one was another nail in the coffin of what used to be our marriage. Mrs. Roberts, he wrote, they've been meeting daily, mostly at hotels. I'll keep recording. I thanked him briefly and went back to pretending. Pretending to smile, pretending to cook dinner, pretending to listen when Julian talked about clients and business meetings. But behind every calm nod, I was memorizing his lies word for word. That night, the messages came faster. First, a short video. Then another. And another. In one, Julian and Allison sat in a dim restaurant corner, a bottle of Cabernet between them. Candlelight flickering. He looked at her the way he used to look at me, that quiet, adoring gaze reserved for people who still believe in love. I watched in silence as Allison leaned across the table, touching his hand. Julian smiled. A slow, familiar smile that twisted something deep inside me. In 40 years, he had never smiled like that at me again. Not even when we danced in our kitchen on Sunday mornings. Not even when we celebrated Daniel's graduation. Now that smile belonged to someone else, to the woman who called me mom. I felt sick. Another video followed. The camera angle was from across the street, aimed at a hotel balcony. Room 304, the same number Thomas had mentioned. There they were. Julian and Allison. Standing close, his arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. The city lights glowed behind them, and for a moment, it looked almost beautiful until he kissed her. It wasn't passion. It wasn't even lust. It was intimacy, a practiced, tender kiss between people who thought they were untouchable. I paused the video. My reflection stared back at me from the dark laptop screen, eyes swollen. Face pale, mouth trembling. This was my life unraveling frame by frame. When the phone rang, I jumped. It was Thomas again. They rented the room for the night, he said quietly. He told the front desk he'd be meeting a business partner. I'll stay nearby. Thank you, I whispered, though my voice sounded like it came from someone else. Then I hung up and sat there in silence, staring at the screensaver slowly fading in, photos of my family cycling through old memories. Julian and me, young, laughing on a beach. Daniel as a little boy, covered in flour at the bakery. Allison on her wedding day, smiling shyly beside my son. And now, this. I opened my laptop again and saved every file, photos, videos, the audio recording of their scheme, onto a single flash drive. Then I printed them all. Each photo slid out of the printer with a mechanical whir, the sound crisp and final, like a judge's gavel. I laid them out on the dining table, 40 years of life, now reduced to pieces of evidence. There was Julian laughing with Allison. Julian touching her hand. Julian holding her in that balcony glow. Julian lying to my face every morning, pretending he still loved me. And there, on the far end of the table, was a photo from our wedding. I stared at it for a long time, the veil, the flowers, the promise. I whispered to that photograph. You were supposed to protect me from this. But love can't protect anyone. Especially when the person you love is the one holding the knife. The next day, Thomas sent another message. Mrs. Roberts, I overheard them outside the law office. They're preparing transfer papers for the bakery. She called you, the old hag. He said you'd sign anything he put in front of you. The words hit me harder than any slap could. The old hag. That's what she called me. The girl I had taught how to bake, how to fold dough gently, how to make our family's flan recipe, the one I once called my daughter. My throat tightened. I wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but instead, I just breathed, steady and cold. They weren't just cheating. They were plotting to erase me. To take everything I had ever worked for, the bakery, the contracts, the brand I'd built with my own hands. The realization didn't make me crumble. It made me sharper. I copied the new recording into the flash drive, labeling it, Evidence 3 Conspiracy. I placed it in a small metal box beneath the floorboard under the kitchen sink, my hidden vault. Then I locked the drawer and stood there for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. My hands were shaking, but my mind had never been clearer. That was the night I stopped being afraid of the truth. Because once you've seen the worst someone can do to you, what else is there to fear? Julian came home past midnight, reeking of alcohol and expensive perfume. He stumbled into bed without a word. I lay beside him, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold distance between us. He snored softly, content, unbothered. And in that quiet, something new began to form in me. Not sadness, not grief. A plan. I knew then that I couldn't just expose them. I had to make them feel it, the humiliation, the helplessness, the burn of every lie. By the time the clock struck 2, I had already decided. There would be no confrontation, no shouting, no tears. Only justice. Silent, perfect, poetic justice. By the time dawn arrived, I already knew what I was going to do. Julian had crossed a line he could never return from, and I would not be the woman who begged for answers. I would be the woman who taught him what truth costs. He came into the kitchen that morning humming, the same tune he used to hum when life was still kind. I slid a plate of toast toward him, watching his hands, his eyes, his every gesture. He poured his coffee, took a sip, and smiled. "Juliet, I have to sign some papers this week," he said casually. "Business contracts. Complicated stuff, maybe you can look them over later." I knew exactly what those papers were. The fake contracts. The ones Allison had begged him to hurry up and sign. I kept my voice steady. "Of course, dear," I said softly. "I'll look at them tonight. I'm just tired today." He nodded, kissed the top of my head, and walked away. He didn't see my eyes, cold, steady, unblinking. That was the moment I began the setup. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. No shaking, no panic, just focus. I waited until his car pulled out of the driveway, then went straight to the bedroom. I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser, the one that squeaked, and pulled out Daniel's old recorder. A small black device with a red light and a long memory. He used it in college for lectures. Now, it would record something far more important. I checked the battery. Dead. I replaced it, pressed record, and heard the quiet hum of life return. Then I hid it behind the bookshelf, next to the headboard, the perfect spot to capture every whisper in that room. I covered the wire with an old family photo, our family at Daniel and Allison's wedding. I looked at that photo for a long time. The four of us smiling. The bouquet in her hands. The proud arm Julian had wrapped around me. I almost laughed. What a beautiful lie. That night, I pretended to be tired. "I have to wake up early tomorrow," I told him, yawning. "I'm meeting a new supplier." He nodded, distracted, scrolling through his phone. I turned off the light and closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, waiting, listening to his breathing. When his snores became steady, I opened my eyes. And then I heard it, the faint creak of the floorboard as he got up. The soft glow of his phone screen in the darkness. He tiptoed to the living room, whispering into the phone. "Yes, tomorrow morning. She's leaving early. We'll have the house to ourselves." A pause. A woman's voice giggled on the other end, light, familiar, venomous. "Allison." "That's great, Dad," she said sweetly. "Finally, we can relax." My stomach turned. He whispered again, lower this time. "Come around 10. I'll make sure everything's ready." When he hung up, I waited until he was asleep again. Then I slipped out of bed, took the car keys from the nightstand, and went into the garage. The air smelled like metal and gasoline. The SUV sat there, his favorite possession, gleaming under the dim light. I opened the door quietly, careful not to wake the house. My flashlight swept across the dashboard, the seats, the glove compartment. And there it was, that same small tube of personal lubricant. Half used, mocking me. I picked it up, holding it in my palm. So small, so insignificant. And yet, it had carried the proof of everything rotten between him and Allison. I carried it to the kitchen. The lemon soap on the counter smelled almost too clean, too innocent. I washed my hands, scrubbing hard, as if I could wash away the betrayal that had seeped into my skin. Then I opened the tool drawer. Inside, next to the screwdrivers and tape, was a small tube of industrial superglue, clear, thick, powerful. The kind that bonded wood, metal, anything it touched. I unscrewed the cap of the lubricant carefully and emptied its contents into the sink. The clear liquid spiraled down the drain, disappearing into darkness. Then I picked up the glue, squeezed it drop by drop into the empty tube until it was full. When I screwed the cap back on, it looked exactly the same. Same weight, same feel. Perfect. I shook it gently, wiped the nozzle clean, and smiled faintly. Justice, sometimes, needs a craftsman's touch. I placed it back into the glove compartment, adjusted the seat, closed the door, and locked the car. Everything was exactly as before, as if nothing had ever been touched. When I returned to the kitchen, I made myself a cup of tea. The night was utterly still. Through the window, the moonlight spilled across the counter, illuminating the empty cup beside mine, Julian's. I looked at that cup and whispered, "You'll drink from your own poison soon enough." Before going back to bed, I checked the recorder one last time. The red light blinked softly behind the photo frame, alive, waiting. In the morning, I was up before the sun. The sky outside was pale gray, the quiet hour when the world is still deciding whether to wake or not. I stood by the stove, staring at a skillet filled with oil. The flame beneath it was low, steady. I tied a thin string to the stove's igniter, ran it across to the open window, and attached it to a small, heavy coffee can. One pull from the outside, and the flame would ignite, sending smoke curling into the air, just enough to cause alarm. Not destruction. Just chaos. A perfect diversion. I tested it once. A quick tug. The flame flared, the oil hissed, and dark smoke began to rise. I turned it off immediately, fanning the smoke away. It worked. Everything was ready. The trap was set. By the time Julian woke up, I was already dressed, my suitcase by the door. "I have to catch the early bus to Nashville," I told him softly. "New contract. I'll be back late." He smiled, relieved. "Of course, honey, go ahead, I'll take care of dinner." His tone, light, almost cheerful, told me everything I needed to know. He was planning it already. Their little morning rendezvous. I kissed his cheek, just like any loyal wife would, and walked out the door. But I didn't go to Nashville. I crossed the street and knocked on Mrs. Peterson's door. When she opened it, still in her robe, her eyes filled with concern. "Juliet, you're up early. What's wrong?" I smiled faintly. "Nothing's wrong," I said. "I just need to stay here for a while. To watch something." She frowned, confused, but nodded. She poured me a cup of coffee and led me to the window overlooking my house. From there, I could see everything, the driveway, the door, the trap I'd built. And I waited. For the truth to walk through that door. And for justice to begin. From Mrs. Peterson's window, I had the perfect view of my house. The same home where I'd spent 40 years loving a man who no longer existed. At exactly 10:02 a.m., a yellow taxi slowed to a stop in front of our driveway. Allison stepped out. She wore a light floral dress, dark sunglasses, and her hair loose, the same sweet, innocent look she used when she wanted everyone to think she was a good girl. But I knew what hid behind that smile. Julian opened the front door within seconds. He looked around, scanning the street like a thief who'd done it too many times before. Then he motioned for her to hurry in. I gripped my coffee cup, my pulse steady. They're inside, I whispered to myself. Mrs. Peterson, sitting beside me, tilted her head. Juliet, what's going on? I just smiled softly. Justice, I said, just justice. I slipped on my headphones, opened the app that connected to the hidden recorder in our bedroom, and turned up the volume. At first, I heard laughter. Glasses clinking. Their footsteps moving across the room. Then Allison's voice, honey sweet. Smug. You really know how to pick your moments. The old hag's gone, right? Julian chuckled. All gone, my love, we've got all day. My blood went cold. Their voices were like poison, every word a stab. But I needed to hear it. I needed to know. Then came the sound I'd expected, the creak of the bed. Her giggles, his murmurs. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing through the rage. Just a little longer, Juliet, I whispered to myself, just a little longer. And then, a sharp scream. It cut through the air like a blade. Allison? Julian's voice, panicked. What the hell, what's going on? More screaming. I can't move, Julian, we're stuck. I couldn't help it. A small, cold smile crept across my face. The superglue had done its job. Their screams grew louder, chaotic, desperate. The sound of panic filled the headphones. I reached over to the window, grabbed the thin string tied to the coffee can, and pulled. A click. A spark. Then the soft hiss of ignition. Inside my kitchen, the stove lit up. The oil began to smoke, thick. Dark clouds rising fast, curling out the open window like ghostly serpents. Mrs. Peterson gasped. Juliet, your house, it's on fire. I widened my eyes, feigning shock. Oh my God. Outside, the neighbors started shouting. Smoke, fire, somebody call the fire department. Perfect. Within minutes, half the street had gathered. Phones came out. People filmed, panicked, yelling. The smoke was dark but harmless, it would never spread far. It was only meant to draw attention. And attention was exactly what they were about to get. Through my headphones, I could still hear Allison sobbing. Julian, do something, it hurts. Julian growled back. Shut up, just stay still, I'm trying. I almost laughed. The man who thought he could control everything was now trapped, literally, in his own deceit. Then I heard it. The sound of sirens in the distance. Growing louder. Closer. The fire truck turned onto our street. Red lights flashing. Neighbors cheered. But when the driver jumped out, my heart clenched. It was Daniel. My son. My baby boy. Wearing his fire chief uniform. Chief Roberts, one of the men shouted. Smoke coming from the kitchen window. Possible victims inside. I froze. Mrs. Peterson looked at me, horrified. Juliet, that's your son. I know, I whispered. I hadn't planned for this. I didn't know he'd be the one to answer the call. But it was too late. The wheels of fate were already turning. Daniel grabbed a sledgehammer and charged toward the front door. Go, move, we've got people inside, he shouted. The crash of breaking wood echoed through the air. Neighbors gasped, their phones recording everything. Mrs. Peterson's hand trembled as she gripped her coffee mug. From my headphones came the chaos inside. Julian's voice shouting, Allison screaming, furniture clattering. Then Daniel's voice, shocked, trembling. What the hell is this? A young firefighter behind him muttered, oh my God. Another let out a nervous laugh before Daniel barked, quiet. The room fell into stunned silence. Through the open doorway, the crowd could see everything. Julian and Allison. Half naked. Stuck together on the bed. Covered only by a sheet. Neighbors gasped. A few women screamed. Someone whispered, isn't that his father? The truth rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Julian and Allison, someone shouted. The father-in-law and the daughter-in-law. The words spread, carried from one horrified mouth to another. Phones rose higher. Cameras clicked. The story was writing itself in real time. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, pale as a ghost. He couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Only stare at the nightmare unfolding in front of him, his father and his wife. Caught in the most humiliating way possible. A firefighter finally broke the silence. "Chief, the smoke's under control. It's just from the stove." Daniel didn't answer. He just turned away, his jaw tight, his hands shaking. Julian tried to shout, "Get out, close the door," but his voice cracked with shame. Allison sobbed, covering her face. Too late. The whole neighborhood had seen. They wrapped the two of them in sheets, carried them out on stretchers. People pointed, whispered, laughed. One old man muttered, "What a disgrace." A younger woman added, "Poor Juliet, after all she did for them." Mrs. Peterson beside me was trembling. She looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. "Juliet, you knew, didn't you?" I turned to her, eyes still on the scene below. And for the first time, I smiled, not cruelly, but quietly. "I knew," I said, "and now, so does everyone else." They loaded Julian and Allison into the ambulance, covered in white sheets, their faces hidden but their shame unerasable. The neighborhood's whispers followed them down the street. Some were cruel, some were pitying, but all of them said the same thing. She got her revenge. And I did. Not out of hatred, but because I wanted him to understand something he never did. That betrayal doesn't vanish quietly. It burns. And sometimes, the only way to end a fire is to start one yourself. The ambulance sirens faded down the street, carrying the two people who had destroyed my family. Julian and Allison, father and daughter-in-law, bound by shame and a thin white sheet. The crowd slowly began to scatter. Phones buzzed with videos already making their rounds on social media. By noon, the whole town would know. By sunset, probably the whole state. I stood there quietly among the onlookers, blending in like just another curious neighbor. Daniel stood in the driveway, frozen. My son, still in his uniform, helmet in hand, staring into nothing. He looked like a man who had watched his entire life collapse in a single moment. I wanted to run to him, to tell him everything, that I was sorry he had to see this. That I never wanted him to find out this way. But I didn't move. Because this wasn't the time for comfort. It was the time for truth. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Peterson drove me to the hospital. The local news had already picked up the story. I heard the radio announcer say it out loud, the words that would define our family forever. Local businessman Julian Roberts and his daughter-in-law involved in bizarre accident amid alleged affair. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle like ashes. So this was how our 40 years would end, not with love. Not with loss, but with headlines. At the hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic and guilt. Doctors rushed in and out of rooms. But everyone knew. The nurses knew. The patients knew. Even the security guard by the elevator knew. You could see it in their eyes when they looked at me, pity. Disbelief. Curiosity. I sat in the hallway outside their room, my purse in my lap, waiting. Mrs. Peterson sat beside me, holding a paper cup of bad coffee. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. After a while, a doctor walked out, sweat on his forehead. He stopped when he saw me. "Mrs. Roberts?" "Yes. They've been separated," he said gently. "No serious injuries, just some skin damage. They'll be fine physically." Physically. The word lingered in the air like a cruel joke. He handed me 2 small tubes. "Here, this is an ointment for the burns. Apply it twice a day." I nodded, thanking him, and watched as he walked away. The nurse's station was busy. But no one paid attention when I reached into my purse and pulled out 2 other tubes, identical in size and color. But mine weren't ointment. They were filled with thick, yellow mustard. A harmless household condiment. But oh, the irony. I swapped the labels carefully, slipped the real ointments into my bag, and stood up. Mrs. Peterson looked at me, eyes wide, but said nothing. She just whispered, "Be careful." I nodded. Always. When I entered the room, the sight was almost pitiful. Julian lay there, pale and exhausted, IV lines in his arm. Allison sat beside him, her hair a tangled mess, eyes red and swollen. The once beautiful girl who had destroyed my family now looked like a child caught stealing. Julian tried to speak first. "Juliet, I can explain." I held up my hand. "No, Julian, you've explained enough." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Please, listen to me." But I didn't. Instead, I placed the 2 tubes on the side table beside their beds and said softly, "Here, the doctor said you'll need these. For the burns." Allison sniffled. "Mrs. Roberts, I didn't let her finish." "I'm not your Mrs. Roberts," I said coldly. "Not anymore." Then I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. Because I didn't need to. Minutes later, as I waited by the elevator, I heard it. A scream, sharp, high, desperate. Then another. "Allison, what the hell? It burns. It burns." Julian's voice. The hallway erupted into chaos. Nurses ran past me, shouting for saline and gauze. Patients peeked out of their rooms. One old woman whispered to another, "That's them, the ones from the news." I pretended to look concerned as the nurse sprinted by. But inside, I felt nothing. No joy. No guilt. Just a quiet, clean sense of balance returning to the world. Mrs. Peterson caught up with me, breathless. "Juliet, they're screaming." "I know," I said simply, "and it's over." As the noise faded, Daniel appeared at the end of the corridor. His face was drawn, his eyes hollow. He was holding a large brown envelope. "Mom," he said quietly, "you left this at home. I think it's yours." I took it from him. Inside were the photos, the videos, the printed emails, the full truth. And on top, the divorce papers I had prepared weeks ago. I walked past him, straight into the room where Julian now sat trembling, his skin red and raw. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Juliet, please, don't do this. I made a mistake." I laid the envelope on his lap. 40 years of marriage," I said softly, "and you ended it with a single choice. Sign them, Julian, sign them, and disappear." Allison was sobbing. "Daniel, please, forgive me," she cried. But Daniel just stood at the doorway, his face cold and unreadable. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than anything. When Julian finally picked up the pen, his hand shook. The scratch of ink on paper sounded final, the sound of a life closing. I turned to leave, but he reached out weakly, his voice hoarse. "Juliet, wait." I stopped, looked back at him, and said the last words I ever would. "You taught me what betrayal feels like. Julian. Let me teach you what freedom feels like." Then I walked out, closing the door behind me. Outside, Daniel leaned against the wall, his face in his hands. When I placed a hand on his shoulder, he whispered, "Why did it have to be them? Mom? Why her?" I didn't have an answer. I just hugged him tightly and said, "We don't choose who betrays us, Daniel. But we do choose what we do next." That night, I lay in bed alone. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't waiting for Julian to come home. The house was silent but not empty. It was finally mine again. And somewhere down the hall, my son was sleeping, the only piece of my life worth keeping. The storm was over. But what remained after it was peace. A few weeks passed. The chaos faded, but the whispers never really stopped. People still talked about the scandal, about Julian and Allison. But this time, they didn't talk with pity, they spoke with awe. Because while they fell apart, I stayed standing. The bakery was busier than ever. Every morning, the little bell over the door sang endlessly as customers came and went. People smiled at me now, not because of gossip, but because they saw something they recognized: survival. Mrs. Peterson stopped by one morning, her hands wrapped around a cup of steaming coffee. "Juliet, your flan has never tasted better," she said with a grin. "Maybe revenge really is the secret ingredient." I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that feels new. Like learning to breathe again. "Maybe peace is," I told her. Outside, the town was alive again. And so was I. Daniel moved back home right after the hospital incident. He didn't talk much about what had happened. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. One evening, he came into the kitchen carrying his suitcase and simply said, "Mom, I'm staying here for a while. I'll help with the bakery. You shouldn't run it alone." I looked at him, my son. No longer the boy who once brought me wildflowers after school, but a man who had been broken and rebuilt by fire. I nodded. "All right," I said, "let's rebuild it together." And we did. Every morning, he helped open the bakery. I would knead the dough, the familiar rhythm grounding me, while Daniel handled deliveries and invoices. Sometimes we didn't speak for hours, and that was okay. Silence between two people who understand each other is a kind of comfort words can't offer. The regulars returned, Mrs. Miller, the Johnson twins, the retired schoolteacher who always ordered extra custard pies. They'd smile and say things like, "Juliet, you're an inspiration," or, "You're stronger than most of us could ever be." I'd smile back politely, but inside, I knew the truth. Strength doesn't come from revenge. It comes from surviving what was meant to destroy you. And choosing to love yourself anyway. One afternoon, as the sun poured through the bakery window, Daniel called out from behind the counter. "Mom, the Grand Hotel just doubled their order for next week." "Good," I said, dusting flour off my apron. "We'll need more vanilla and eggs tomorrow." He nodded, scribbling notes. Then he paused. "Mom?" "Yes?" He smiled faintly. "Can we make flan this weekend? Like the one you used to make when I was a kid?" I looked up at him, his eyes tired, but softer now. "Of course," I said, "but you're stirring the caramel this time." He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. And just like that, the heaviness in the room lifted. That weekend, we did make flan. The same recipe my mother taught me. The same one I once taught Allison. The air smelled of sugar and burnt caramel, warm and golden. We stood side by side in the kitchen, stirring, baking, laughing quietly. For a moment, it felt like life had circled back to something simple and good. I started doing small things for myself again, things I hadn't done in decades. I joined a local cooking club at the community center. The women there shared recipes and stories of heartbreak, loss, and rediscovery. We laughed, sometimes cried, but mostly we baked. "Juliet," one of them said once, "you make the best flan in the group." I smiled. "It's not just flan," I said, "it's 40 years of lessons, all baked in." On weekends, I went to church again. Not to ask for forgiveness. Not to pray for anyone's downfall, just to sit. To let the colored light from the stained glass windows fall across my face. To remember that even after everything, I still believed in grace. Sometimes Mrs. Peterson would walk with me through the town square. The gossip had died down, but now and then someone would whisper. She'd lean close and say, "Everyone still says you won, Juliet." I'd smile, looking at the bakery across the street, its golden sign gleaming in the sunlight. "I didn't win," I said softly, "I just survived, and that's enough." Daniel began talking more as the months passed. About work, about fires, about the people he'd saved. One night, as we ate dinner, just rice, beans, and bread, he looked at me and said, "You know, Mom, we put out a fire at the old market today. It was bad, but no one got hurt." I smiled at him, my heart swelling with pride and fear all at once. "Be careful," I said gently, "you're all I have left." He looked at me with quiet love. "I'll never leave you, Mom." Those words, they healed something inside me that even time couldn't. Because after all the noise, all the flames, all the heartbreak, we were still here. A mother and son. Alive. One morning, I stood by the bakery window, watching the people outside. The sun had just risen. painting everything in gold. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air. Customers lined up, chatting, laughing, living. I thought about Julian and Allison, somewhere far away, carrying their scars, both visible and invisible. Maybe they hated me. Maybe they didn't. But it didn't matter. I didn't do it to destroy them. I did it to save myself. The bakery still stood. Daniel still stood. And so did I. I looked around the bakery, the walls we painted together. The old photos of happier days. The smell of flour and sugar clinging to everything. This was my legacy. Not Julian's. Not theirs. Mine. I brushed a hand over the countertop, still warm from the ovens, and whispered, "You tried to take everything from me. But I'm still here. And I always will be." If you've made it this far into my story, thank you for listening. Tell me, where are you hearing my voice from tonight? And what did you take from this story of silence, betrayal, and rebirth? Because in the end, revenge isn't about hate. It's about reclaiming your peace and learning to stand again, even when everything else falls.